As of the recording of this video, a new installment of the Alien franchise has been released, Alien Romulus. Now, every time one of these Alien movies comes out, there's always that list on social media of people's favorite Aliens movies and their least favorite. Over and over again, I see near or at the bottom, Alien 3. I think it goes without saying that Alien 3 is the often maligned stepchild of the Alien franchise. Many people view Alien 3 as the worst, or at least one of the worst, Alien movies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a big city lawyer, or a lawyer at all, but I'm here to argue the case that Alien 3 is a worthy sci-fi movie. And by the time I'm done, I hope to convince you that it is a worthy installment after Alien and Aliens. We are going to dive into how this movie was misunderstood and underappreciated when it came out. And despite its detractors, Alien 3 deserves another chance to prove its worth to you, esteemed jurors. Alien 3 has been accused inappropriately of many horrible things. After this video is over and you've heard my argument, please leave a comment below with your decision. Is Alien 3 guilty or innocent? Guilty of being a terrible movie, or innocent and deserving of another chance? Now, I've heard all the arguments before. I've said some of the arguments before. But those who believe that Alien 3 is a terrible movie usually recite three reasons. Number one, Alien 3 thematically strays too far away from the themes of Alien and Aliens. Number two, Alien 3 is a visually unpleasant movie and is too ugly and visually different than the previous two movies. And number three, and this is a big one, Alien 3 kills off with malice and without reason beloved characters and thereby ruining their legacy set up in the previous movie. These are very serious accusations, ladies and gentlemen. Serious indeed. However, I am here to tell you that my client, Alien 3, is innocent of all charges. So, members of the jury, allow me to present to you the defense of Alien 3. God help me. I'd like to start off with the main character at the center of this tragedy of justice. Warrant Officer Ellen Ripley was born on January 7th, 2093 in Olympia, Luna in the United Americas. She married a man named Alex McLaren, and they had a daughter named Amanda. Ripley was a skilled pilot working for the Weyland-Yutani Corporation as a commercial freight operator. In 2120, Ripley joined the crew of the USCSS Nostromo. Later that year, the Nostromo departed Earth for what was supposed to be a 13-month mining expedition. However, sometime during the Nostromo's trip, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation detected a message coming from a planet called LV-426. At the time, it wasn't clear whether it was a distress signal or a warning. But either way, Weyland-Yutani wanted to know who was sending that signal, and they wanted a piece of that pie. The Nostromo was redirected to LV-426, set down, and discovered a spaceship of unknown origin, if you don't watch the other movies. While on board the derelict ship, the Nostromo's first officer, Thomas Kane, was attacked by a facehugger and impregnated with the xenomorph. And I need to mention this because it becomes important later. When Weyland-Yutani first detected the signal, they secretly directed a synthetic named Ash, who was already on board the Nostromo, to take actions and make sure that whatever they find on LV-426 gets back to Weyland-Yutani in one piece. The crew, including Ripley, was expendable. Weyland-Yutani wanted to get back their prize without any problems with human interference. Once it was discovered that the xenomorph inside Kane may be of significant scientific and military value, Order 937 was activated by Weyland-Yutani. When this order was activated, this gave Ash the power and the authority to do whatever was necessary to get that xenomorph back to Weyland-Yutani. The crew of the Nostromo did what they could to fight the xenomorph, but it was just too deadly. They were more or less unarmed to fight this creature And all the while, Ash is working against them. One by one, the crew of the Nostromo was killed by the Xenomorph. Kane was the first to go from the chestburster. Then Brett, Dallas, Ash, Lambert, and then finally Parker. One of the great tragedies of the Nostromo is that Brett and Parker never got to talk about the bonus situation.
Before we dock, I think we ought to discuss the bonus situation.
Right.
That only left one survivor of the Nostromo, Ripley. Ripley was only able to get out of there alive in an escape pod. She set the self-destruct for the Nostromo, blowing it up. In the escape pod, she came face to face with the Xenomorph, but was able to outsmart it, ejecting it out into space, never to be seen again. Unfortunately for Ripley, the escape pod wasn't really meant for interplanetary travel. It had some issues, and she ended up being adrift in space for 57 years. Thankfully, she was in hypersleep, so she didn't really age. However, everyone else did. So her daughter, Amanda, in those 57 years, grew up without a mother, had her own family, and then had passed away herself. I can only imagine the toll Ripley's absence must have had on Amanda. Ripley was only supposed to be gone for 1 year. She was actually gone for almost 60 years, and Amanda didn't live long enough to see Ripley eventually return. So essentially at this point, Ripley was still alive, but her family and her entire life before the Nostromo was now ancient history and now gone. In addition to that loss, once Ripley was kind of thawed out, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation went after her, trying to blame her for the loss of the Nostromo. See, in their mind, Ripley prevented them from getting their prize, the Xenomorph. So of course they couldn't admit this in public, so they tried to blame Ripley for the loss of the Nostromo on her recklessness. And to further rub salt in the wound, they denied the existence at all of the Xenomorph, even though they knew damn well that Xenomorph existed.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
So sometime during those 60 years that Ripley was drifting in space, a Weyland-Yutani up-and-comer named Carter Burke sent a terraforming colony to LV-426, knowing damn well what was down there. It was Burke's hope that someone from the colony would come across the derelict spacecraft again and bring back one of those xenomorphs to Weyland-Yutani. It was the perfect plan. Plausible deniability. No one knew about it, so no one could get blamed. If this plan worked, Burke would have become a superstar in the Weyland-Yutani Corporation because he would have brought them their prize. So it'd be worth any risk to Burke. His career would be on easy street, and Weyland-Yutani's weapons division would have a new toy. Ripley, for her troubles, was fired from commercial shipping. However, Weyland-Yutani decided not to bring charges against her for the destruction of the Nostromo. They really just wanted all their plans to remain secret, and let's let this story go away. One day, and this is a surprise to no one, the colony of LV-426 misses its regular check-in with central office. Then another one is missed, and then a third. One or two check-ins being missed could be easily explained by technical issues. But once you've reached 2 or 3 missed check-ins, it only spells one thing: trouble. Burke's plan worked a little too well. Instead of one colonist bringing back one xenomorph, the entire colony, 60 to 70 families, ended up being impregnated and giving birth to xenomorphs. Hundreds of these monsters are now running around the colony on LV-426. And remember, it only took one of them to take out the Nostromo. After some apologies and some groveling and some corporate lingo, Burke is able to somehow convince Ripley to go with a group of Space Marines as an advisor to LV-426 to investigate what happened. The ship they're on is on the Sulaco, and as a side note, is one of the coolest ships in all of sci-fi. Despite Ripley's warnings, almost immediately the Space Marines are overwhelmed by the ferocity and sheer number of these xenomorphs.
17 days? Hey man, I don't want to rain on your parade. We're not going to last 17 hours.
While they're investigating the colony on LV-426, they find one survivor, a little girl named Rebecca Jordan, otherwise known as Newt. The Space Marines initially disregard Ripley's warnings. They're brash and immature. But by the end of the movie, Almost every one of them has a heroic moment, and they rise to the occasion fighting these aliens. Unfortunately, it's not enough, and just like the crew of the Nostromo, they're hunted down one by one. Only Ripley, Newt, a synthetic named Bishop, and Corporal Hicks survived the ordeal. I need to point out that while she was on LV-426 with the Space Marines, Ripley discovered a new type of xenomorph, a queen xenomorph. A queen is a lot bigger and a lot more vicious than a regular xenomorph, and it's able to lay eggs, and each one of those eggs had a face hugger inside it. So contact with a regular xenomorph would be deadly, but contact with a queen xenomorph would mean extinction. Unfortunately, the queen hitches a ride back on the dropship to the Sulaco, which leads to one of the greatest showdowns in sci-fi history. The fight between the xenomorph queen and Ripley in the power loader. They have this big fight in the hangar of the Sulaco, but Ripley once again is able to expel the queen out in space, never to be seen again. They just can't let things die, can they? Now remember when Ash betrayed the crew of the Nostromo? Well, that gave Ripley some really bad feelings towards synthetics, some trust issues, if you will. However, Bishop, through his heroism and self-sacrifice, earned Ripley's respect and repaired that relationship between Ripley and the synthetics. So Ripley got a new friend with Bishop, a new adoptive daughter with Newt, and a new love interest with Hicks. So after 60 or 70 or who knows how many years of fighting the xenomorph, Ripley gets her happy ending, and they all lived happily ever after. And then came Alien 3. Alien 3 starts with Ripley, Bishop, Hicks, and Newt all in hypersleep on board the Sulaco. Apparently, multiple xenomorph eggs were smuggled on board. We're not sure by who, we're not sure how, but it happened. The first suspect, of course, is Burke, but he was trapped on LV-426 just like everyone else, so it's unclear how this got on board. Somehow the facehuggers cause a fire on the Sulaco, and all 4 survivors are ejected from the Sulaco in an escape capsule. The capsule tumbles through space, and they crash land on a planet called Fiorina 161, otherwise known by the charming name of Fury 161. As a side note, the word Fiorina comes from the word flower, which I presume is a ghoulish irony because Fury 161 is a terrible shithole at the ass end of the universe. The planet is a prison colony that doubles as a labor camp. Actually, I take that back. It's worse than that. It's so terrible there that Weyland-Yutani wanted to close it down, but the prisoners got together and said, hey, we'll keep it running if you let us live here. So they choose to live there. So our old friends at Weyland-Yutani said, you keep running it and we'll send you a supply ship every 6 months. And this was enough to keep them alive. Like most prisons, this one's full of the worst of the worst. But they're bonded together through a sense of religion, brotherhood, and duty to each other. The escape pod comes tumbling down and crashes on Fury 161. Ripley is once again the lone survivor. Hicks and Newt are killed in the crash, and Bishop is destroyed beyond repair. Correction, there is one other survivor. A facehugger was stowed away on board. The facehugger escapes and impregnates one of the oxen on the planet, which gives birth to a new type of xenomorph, which there seems to be a new one every movie. This one is sleeker, faster, and made out of terrible CGI. As Ripley starts to come to terms with reality and mourns the loss of Newt and Hicks, the xenomorph starts its rampage, going around and quietly killing off the prisoners of Fury 161. Being a prison planet full of terrible, terrible criminals, the first xenomorph attacks are considered to be either accidents or prisoner-on-prisoner violence. Eventually, all the prisoners realize that they're being hunted by a monster, a true monster. Ripley then discovers that she herself has been impregnated.
What is it?
I think you've got one inside of you.
But instead of carrying inside her a normal xenomorph, she's carrying inside her a queen. This is really the thematic linchpin for me that ties the existence of the xenomorph with Ripley's existence. We'll go into that more later. The inmates have to come together to defend themselves, and they really rally around the leadership provided by Ripley, the prison doctor named Clemens, and the prison's religious leader, a firebrand theologian named Dylan, my favorite character in the movie. Through quite a clever plan and effective teamwork, the prisoners are eventually able to capture and kill the xenomorph. While all of this is going on, Weyland-Yutani finds out that their xenomorph, the thing they've been hunting themselves for the past 70 years, is on Fury 161. So they send a ship ASAP out there. When they find out that Ripley's got a queen inside her, they nearly cream themselves and they really punch the gas to get to this nasty, nasty planet as soon as possible. However, through their bad luck, just as they were showing up to claim their prize, Ripley, knowing she's about to die with the queen inside her, jumps into a pool of molten metal, killing her and the queen, both of them never to be seen again. Now for the defense. I can fully admit that Alien 3 is a flawed movie. I would go so far as to say is the mistakes made in the production of Alien 3 almost ruin it for me. The CGI is terrible, there's editing mistakes, there's audio mistakes, and admittedly, it's a lot darker and more depressing than the other two movies. But, and this is a big but, even with all those problems, I think it's unfair to say that Alien 3 is a terrible movie or that it's a franchise killer. So once again, let's look at the charges being leveled against Alien 3. Charge 1. Alien 3 thematically strays too far away from the themes of Alien and Aliens. Charge 2. Alien 3 is a visually unpleasant movie that's too ugly and different from the previous two Alien movies. Charge 3. Alien 3 kills off beloved characters with malice and without reason, thus ruining their legacy set up in the previous film. Let's start off with this. I believe that Alien 3 is better than Alien Resurrection and any of the Alien vs. Predator movies. Furthermore, I think Prometheus and Covenant did more to wreck the canon behind the Alien series than Alien 3 ever could dream of doing. I haven't seen Romulus yet. I really have no interest in seeing it. I might set sail to Tortuga to find me a copy, mateys. So I'm saying all this to tell you that I'm not trying to compare Alien 3 with the movies that came after it. My argument is, I would like for you to consider that Alien 3 belongs in the original trilogy of Alien, Aliens, and then Alien 3. And then nothing after that. It's true. Alien 3 is a gritty, ugly, visually sickening movie. And I normally hate this argument, but isn't it supposed to be ugly? Let's talk about the visuals for the first movie, Alien. The visuals in the first movie did a really great job of showing our scientific and industrial future with lots of white backgrounds and bright lighting. By the end of Alien, the xenomorph has gone in there like a wrecking ball and ruined all of the white backgrounds and bright lights and has changed everything to flashing red, darkness, blaring alarms, mystery steam, smoke, fire. It's just a hellscape by the end of the movie. And then it blows up. Now let's fast forward to Aliens. When Ripley first wakes up, she is in a Weyland-Yutani base that has kind of the same brightness and white walls and crispness of the original Alien on the Nostromo. On the Sulaco, everything's grays and blues and military precision and decor. And just like the movie that came before it, the battle with the xenomorph turns all these nice, clean colors into fire and smoke and goo and death. At the end of Aliens, Ripley gets her happy ending and it returns to the cleanliness and the bright whites and she lives happily ever after. Then Alien 3 starts. In a huge contrast from the last two movies, Alien 3 starts in the slime, filth, darkness, utter misery. These are symbolized by the rampant flea or lice problem, whatever their problem is, and even the demeanor and behavior of the criminals occupying Fury 161. Everyone and everything is ugly on this planet, inside and out. And the longer Ripley stays there, the more ugliness you see in her as well. Now, I can't read minds to know what the intent was. I wasn't there. I can only describe what I see with my 4 eyes. To me, Alien 3 serves as the final chapter for the Alien saga in more ways than one. It harkens back to the dark and ugly cesspool at the end of Alien and Aliens, but this time it's serving as a conclusion for the entire trilogy. And this time, the ugliness is not serving just the purposes of one movie or even the trilogy. It's really serving as an ending for the story of Ripley herself. Let's take a moment and consider that the trilogy is not just 3 movies, but it's also the legend of Ellen Ripley. Some would say a cautionary tale. She starts off as a young and hopeful and skilled pilot, really the master of her own little universe. She's got a family at home, and presumably she's making enough money with Weyland-Yutani to live a fairly comfortable lifestyle. It's in Alien that Ripley's life and her destiny becomes permanently intertwined with the life and the destiny of the xenomorph. Immediately once that connection is made, she loses her family, she loses her livelihood, and really her sense of what's real and what's not. And very quickly you start realizing that Ripley is slowly losing the ability to think and feel like a regular human being. Then in the second movie, she gets the chance to face her fears, to separate her life from that of the xenomorph, and to reclaim her humanity. If you stop watching at the end of Aliens, you would think that she was successful. However, if we were to consider this to be a trilogy, we now know that she failed. She might have been able to blow up the Nostromo and the colony in LV-426, but she was unable to separate her destiny from that of the xenomorph, which means Alien 3 becomes really the end of the road for both of them. I would argue that the visuals of Alien 3, as ugly as they are, and the story of Alien 3, as imperfect as it is, both serve as integral parts to tell the story of really the downward spiral of one Ellen Ripley. Immediately in Alien 3, and I mean within the first few minutes, everything that Ripley had gained in Aliens in the previous movie, including her humanity, is snatched away from her. Her happy ending from Aliens is erased. However, allow me to pose this question to you. Knowing what you know now of Ellen Ripley, which of these 2 endings do you feel will be most fitting for her story? Choice A gives Ripley the happy ending, the fairy tale ending. Some people call it the saccharine ending. She gets a second chance to be a mother, she gets the second chance to have a love interest, and then she gets a second chance to have a robot friend. The xenomorph is gone forever, and she gets to drift back to Earth without a care in the universe. Choice B, or the Alien 3 ending, gives Ripley's story the tragedy ending, the one I find to be much more interesting and the one I prefer. Once again, and just like in between Alien and Aliens, Ripley loses everything. In Alien 3, she also has to come to terms with a terminal condition of sorts and realizes that her life is now part of this mortal exchange. The exchange is this: if she lives, the xenomorph lives. And I don't mean one, I mean the species. If she dies, the xenomorph ceases to exist. And even if you prefer the ending to Aliens, what makes you think that as soon as she arrived back on Earth or back to Weyland-Yutani territory, that they wouldn't be waiting there to throw her in jail, or worse, because now she has blown up the Nostromo, blown up the colony on LV-426, but also secretly foiled the plans for Weyland-Yutani to get this xenomorph to their military division for almost 60 years. They may have let her go the first time because they didn't want a publicity problem, but they're not about to let her go again. What I'm proposing to you is I find that the Alien 3 ending is much more interesting and realistic than the ending of Aliens, no matter how much better it makes me feel to watch the ending of Aliens. We all like a happy ending. But when you look at the reality, Alien 3, I think, is the more fitting ending. The self-sacrifice, the darkness, the nihilism, the fact that Ripley and the Xenomorph share the same fate fits more into my vision of Ripley than the cheery ending of Aliens. The moment Ash opened that door to the Nostromo, even though it was against protocol, their lives became the same, and their destinies have now become the same. In Alien 3, she is cast away like garbage on a planet that's nothing but garbage. To me, the setting of Alien 3, no matter how ugly it is perfect. The planet that humanity not just forgot, but abandoned. Ripley realizes the most depressing and nihilistic truth, that she is doomed. But in her death means also the end of the Xenomorph. When I think of Ellen Ripley, the character that I would compare her to is Sarah Connor from the Terminator series. Sarah Connor starts off as a happy and naive waitress, but then ends up as a dark and grizzled soldier that's perpetually preparing for a war that she thinks that she can't avoid. If you think about it, everything on Fury 161 is designed to further dehumanize Ripley. The fact that it's inhabited by criminals, the fact that those criminals are all men and would her without hesitation. Also, there's the flea problem that requires her to shave her head, which not only dehumanizes her, but really defeminizes her as well. All of these horrible, horrible things are used to rob Ripley of the last fragments of her humanity. The director, David Fincher, before he became a more respected visual storyteller, crafted an atmosphere in Alien 3 that's as oppressive and bleak as any of them in the series. And not to repeat myself, but the setting serves as not just a backdrop, but it's a character, reflecting themes of isolation, decay, and existential dread. Is it disgusting? Yes, because it has to be. Furthermore, when Ripley finds out that Hicks and Newt are gone, and it's partially because of a Xenomorph, she realizes that she can never go back to that life that she had before she stepped foot on the Nostromo all those years ago. For 60 some odd years, she has been doomed to live with two curses, really. The Xenomorph and Weyland-Yutani. Alien 3, despite its problems, has some great themes. But let us not confuse happy themes with powerful themes. Ripley's final act of self-sacrifice by throwing herself in the molten metal in order to prevent the alien from reaching Earth isn't just a plot point. It's a commentary on the ideas of heroism, a last act of humanity, and the nature of legacy. I also found the fractured camaraderie amongst the inmates of Fury 161 to be a high point in the movie. Almost every character in Alien 3, through their great acting, is able to breathe and characterize themselves without the usual exposition dump you would get in lesser movies. Played by mostly a group of very talented British actors, the prisoners, through their characterization, really and ironically bring life into Fury 161, which is trying to take away their humanity. The inmates of Fury 161 are without a doubt vicious and evil, but there's something about their personality that's just a little bit charming. And maybe it's the interactions they have with each other that really shows that. You really grow to like them, but you also in the back of your mind have to remember that they would kill you in an instant. The character development of the inmates and the other characters on Fury 161 is so much more natural and diegetic than the character introductions for Prometheus or Covenant or any of the other movies besides Alien and Aliens. And the less that can be said about the character development in Alien vs. Predator, those movies, the better. And even within that group of characters on Fury 161, there are standouts that go above and beyond with their acting. I have to start with Charles S. Dutton. I have been a fan of Charles S. Dutton and his acting and his life story, really, since I first saw him in the TV series Rock. Charles S. Dutton's performance as Dylan in Alien 3, as the prisoner's spiritual leader, delivers such a huge amount of depth and intensity and really serves as a highlight and probably my favorite character in Alien 3. Dylan is a complex character. A former inmate who had found redemption and leadership within the prison's religious community, Dutton brought a gravitas to the role, portraying Dylan as both a hardened criminal and a man of faith. The duality is compelling and interesting. Charles S. Dutton effectively conveys Dylan's natural leadership abilities. His character commands respect from both the inmates and eventually from Ripley herself. Next, I have to mention Charles Dance, Tywin Lannister himself. Or is he Tyrion? Mr. Lannister himself. Charles Dance plays the role of Clemens, the medical officer. His character is one of the few as a semblance of professionalism and compassion in a setting filled with rough and hardened inmates. Dance brings a layer of depth to Clemens, making him stand out as someone with a troubled past, but with a strong moral compass. He provides a stark contrast to the other characters on the prison planet. While many are gruff and overly aggressive, Clemens is more refined, which Dance portrays effectively. I also want to point out that Clemens meets Ripley at probably her lowest point. Actually, this is her lowest point. My point is this: when Clemens gets too close to the truth, Ripley wants to really distract him. Her choice is to offer sexy time, which he gladly accepts. Through their acting, it's pretty clear how Clemens feels about Ripley, but it's not entirely clear how Ripley feels about Clemens. And this may be just another example of Ripley's declining humanity. He likes her, but does she like him, or is she using him? We'll never know. I didn't hear him complaining. Also, did you know there's a Doctor Who in this movie? Paul McGann was in Alien 3. Paul McGann played the Doctor in the 1996 TV movie in between Sylvester McCoy's Doctor and Christopher Eccleston's reboot Doctor. However, in Alien 3, and the biggest reason most people don't recognize him, is Paul McGann plays Golik, a deeply troubled inmate with a mix of religious fervor and mental instability. He has a dark and foreboding presence. No one really likes him, even amongst his brothers. He's a real psycho, masterfully played by McGann. Other actors of note in Alien 3 include the late and legendary actor Pete Postlewaite. You might recognize him from Usual Suspects. He was a big character actor. Along with Ralph Brown, who played 85, the late Brian Glover, who played Superintendent Andrews, and Lance Henriksen, who plays multiple versions of Bishop. One version of Bishop I will call the real Bishop that's all busted up from the crash. I suppose Lance Henriksen voiced that part, but it's such a good performance. The fake Bishop at the end of the movie, not so much. And in a blink or you'll miss it role, even Holt McCallany plays Junior, and even though he tries to rape Ripley, at least he remembers to wear protection. What more can be said about Alien 3? It has been accused inappropriately of many horrible things. I hope I have shown you that perhaps we were wrong and this movie deserves another chance. After this video is over, please go underneath this video and put a comment with your verdict. Guilty or innocent? Guilty means it is a terrible movie and should not be forgiven. Or innocent, which is the preferred verdict, of course. Can we find it in our hearts to forgive? Can Alien 3 finally be elevated to the point where it could stand alongside its brothers, Alien and Aliens? It can still be the worst one of the three, but it is my hope that after today, we can consider it part of the trilogy. Then you and I can have a lasting peace. We can join hands as brothers and continue shitting on all the Alien movies that came after Alien 3 together. I rest my case. I'm also losing my voice. This is a long-ass video. Before you go, it would very much help me if you left a like on this video. And don't forget to leave your comment below with your verdict. Also, subscribing to my channel is free, and I don't release videos that often, so what's the harm? Anyway, if you stuck with me for this long, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Goodbye.